Hi, this is Bob Sang. I am a member of the Benefits and Compensation Department at Dorsey and Whitney.
And this is Melinda Mayer, and I'm a member of the Benefits and Compensation Department at Dorsey as well.
This screencast today, you might recall that Melinda and I raised some questions in a screencast last week, and this week we're going to try to answer some of those questions. And we're really directing what we're saying today to employers who think they will be passing that 70% ACA test in 2015 relatively easily. But these concepts will apply to others as well. So hopefully everyone that looks at this will get a little something out of the screencast. All right, review. Background. The employer shared responsibility requires
Offers to 70% of your full time employees in 2015, and that'll go up to 95% of your full time employees in 2016. And if you fail to do that, you will pay a tax.
And we're kind of hitting hard on this because these rules, they sort of make their way into the design of a plan, but the ACA rules are really about setting forth some minimum standards that if a plan doesn't meet, they end up paying a tax. Okay, there's a few ways to identify full-time employees. Do you want to run us through those, Melinda?
Yeah, now this is to decide who your full time employees are for ACA purposes. You can use a look back measurement period or a monthly measurement period. And there are lots of rules and details around that.
Yeah, and I think your point about this is how we identify full-time employees for ACA is important. My hunch is over time that will turn into everybody's definition of full-time. But right now, an employer's definition of the full-time workforce could very easily, by practice, be something different than what we've got under ACA. Now, this employer group that we're talking about today, as we've mentioned, has relatively broad eligibility rules for health care. And they're kind of winging it in terms of who their employees are in 2015. And that's because they know they're going to pass the 70% test. But they're not exactly sure who their employees are who would be classified as full-time under ACA. So we have a little example here. We've got a red box, and the red box represents most of the employer's employees. Many of them, but not all, are full-time. Okay? Now, there's a few other groups of employees. We've got the interns, we've got the seasonal employees, and then we've got the ever-present tech group. No one quite knows what they do, but we've always got them. But these boxes are relatively small in number in our example, and we're sure they're less than 30% of our full-time employees. So again, the example we're talking about is this red box represents most of the company, and the red box represents where the group of employees that are getting offers of coverage. All right. So the moral of the story for 2015 is don't worry, be happy. 2016 might be different. Okay. But there's one thing that companies have to think about who are in this spot, and that would be ACA reporting. So what kind of questions should we be asking, Melinda?
Well, employers are going to know where their full-time employees are for ACA purposes so they can report them properly on their 1094Cs. And then making sure they're going to issue the 1095Cs to the proper persons.
Great. And really what we want to move to now is sort of discussion of the risks that these employers are going to face if they have incomplete data.
Right.
So just sort of a reminder, what we're sort of assuming here is we've got an employer that doesn't have a real precise understanding of who its full-time and part-time employees are for this ACA reporting year, in part because they know they're going to satisfy things relatively easily.
Exactly.
And just a reminder of our hypothetical employer here is we've got ABC company with interns, seasonal, and tech, and the red box represents the universe of people who get offers of coverage. Now, within sort of incomplete understanding of who their full-time employees are, ABC company might have a sense of false comfort. So the example we've got here, and jump in, Melinda, is you might be able to see the mouse on the screen. You've got this first column that shows individuals who've been reported as full-time employees. So ABC is assuming that everyone at ABC is full-time, and they've got 100 employees there. They're assuming they've got 35 tech employees. They're not quite sure, but that's what they think, for a total of 135 full-time employees. Now, at the beginning of this year, they knew that if they made offers of coverage to 70% of their full-time employees, they'd be okay. So the column on the right then represents the groups who have gotten offers of full-time coverage. 100 of these ABC, headquarters employees get coverage. They've intentionally not made offers of coverage to the 35 tech workers, and they get to 75%. Anything to add on that one, Melinda?
No, that makes sense.
Okay, so gold star. All right, now let's assume that ABC says, wait a minute, let's look at these numbers more carefully and do some actual measuring. What they find is that at ABC, rather than 100 full-time employees, they've actually got 80. And I don't know about you, Melinda, but that's not all that uncommon. They might have some part-time employees who, for one reason or another, they've just never really bothered to identify as part-time employees.
Correct. I agree with that.
Okay. And then they have the tech, 0 offers there. Actually, they found out they have 1 full-time seasonal employee. They thought they were seasonal, but under closer scrutiny, it turns out that they're a full-time employee. And then there's that intern that just never leaves. So with a closer look, this company finds out they have 117 full-time employees. 80 of them have gotten offers of coverage, and they are down. They thought they had 100 full-time employees. They don't. They're down to 68% on that coverage test, which is awfully bad news for 2015. So what do you think, Melinda? How does this look?
Well, it looks pretty bad.
Like dire disaster?
Well, no, it's probably not that bad.
Oh, and look at that. We even have some sunlight. So we used some pretty extreme numbers. The lawyers like to sometimes show how the sky can fall. And that's possible. Some of you, that could happen this year. We don't think that's where the problem lies. But we kind of gave you those numbers to illustrate the effect. But what you do have to think about, if you're not entirely up to speed on identifying your full-time employees with ACA-esque rigor, is how you're going to complete those forms for this year. And then remember that 70% goes to 95%. 95 is the new 70 in 2016. And all of a sudden the math here gets a little more significant. So the next couple slides are going to go through things that will pop up, challenges that will pop up for those of us who can't quite, with total precision, identify our full-time employees. And I'm guessing what some employers in that spot will do is over-report part-time employees as full-time employees on their forms. Okay. So what are the let's assume we want to get this thing as close as possible, and we know that we've been kind of rough so far. What can we do to get our 1094C as accurate as possible? And again, this 1094C is the cover sheet that goes into the IRS.
Right, and what we're talking about really is how to get the number of full-time employees that we're reporting on 1094C to be as accurate as possible.
So give us some best practices.
Well, I mean, you're going to maybe pick and choose what measurement periods work for you. Now you can use a look-back measurement, and you can use a monthly measurement, and you can vary those depending on, in in certain circumstances, you're a little limited on that, but you can work with those concepts.
So this can be sort of an abstract painting. I can do whatever I want with whatever group I want.
No, I mean, so we can only really vary with respect to full times or I'm sorry, with respect to salarieds and hourlies. If you have a union population, you can do something different with respect to them, maybe with respect to locations. So you're a little limited on this, but you got to look pretty closely at these types of employees and pick the measurement period that you think is going to work best for you and the employee population, and that may help you get a little bit better handle on who your full-time employees are.
Sounds good. And for at least for hourly people, we can use equivalencies. That's one of the sort of the tools we have in our toolbox to simplify things, right?
Yeah, it's salaried. Salaried, you can use the equivalencies
Excuse me,
with.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
good, thanks. And now is the time to start talking to your vendor about how you can do some sort of custom employee identification. I don't know how many employers are at that spot yet. Many employers have gotten some fairly complex data requests from their vendors, and we may be now at a point where you need to start kind of, in quotes, negotiating with your vendor to provide them some different slicing and dicing in order to come up with your best result possible in terms of identifying full-time employees.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that you document how you're doing this. And in fact, we're even suggesting to put a lot of the documentation around this into your plan documents.
Yeah, I think this is a great use for an umbrella plan document. You might do this in a less official place, but the regs do have some process requirements that they impose on employers when they're changing their approach for identifying their full-time employees from year to year. Okay, so that was the 1094C. Let's talk about the 1095Cs, and those are the forms that the individual employees get that are sort of like a W-2. Okay, so there's a few rules. All full-time employees get a 1095C. And then any part-time employee who accepts an offer of coverage gets a 1095C. So if you think back to our red box that had 100 employees, turns out only 80 of them were actually full-time employees. Of that group of 20 part-time employees, any one of them who took an offer of coverage gets a 1095C. But Melinda, what about those who turned down an offer of coverage? Do they need a 1095C?
Right. Well, not as a technical matter. The regulations say no, you don't need to issue a 1095C to a part-time employee who does not take your coverage.
So why don't I just do that? Does it cause any problems?
Well, yeah. So that I think is really the issue.
Okay, and we're going to list those right here. So you want to talk through these potential problems?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. So assume a part-time employee goes to an exchange. Assume one of those part-time employees in that group of 20 in the red box goes to an exchange and they get insurance and they get a subsidy. Well, because they're part-time and because their salary isn't going to be as high as a full-time employee, that employee may look to the exchange like a full-time employee who went to the exchange and got the subsidy because their income wasn't high enough. So all of a sudden, you've issued a 1095C to an employee who you really didn't have to issue one to in the first place. They go to the exchange, they get a subsidy, and you're going to be on the phone with the IRS.
Right, because they look like a full-time employee who was getting offered coverage that wasn't affordable, when in fact they're actually a part-time employee to whom you had no obligation to offer coverage.
Right, so guess what, Melinda? I think we're answering one of these questions that we imposed on ourselves last week. What's the deal with a part-time employee who is treated, in fact, by the employer as a full-time employee? What kind of problems can arise? And this is one of those problems.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look for just a minute at what a 1095C Part 2 might look like for a part-time employee that because we don't know they're part-time, we're going to just treat them as a full-time employee and we're going to issue them a 1095C. The one we've got on the screen now is for someone who is enrolled. No harm, no foul, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so.
Mm-hmm. Their line 14 is going to have the golden 1A. And if it's the golden 1A, this is for plans that where the cost for single coverage is 9.5% of the federal poverty line. You don't even have to put a cost number on line 15. And if line 16 shows they're enrolled, I can't see a scenario where the government is going to look into that person.
No, right. I mean, and in fact, a part time employee who does enroll for coverage, we have to report. Now, what we would normally do is actually, I think we would report them like this.
Okay, so the problem example shows up here. This would be, on line 14, let's say that we have a plan that offers MEC to employees and their dependents. It's more expensive than 9.5% of the federal poverty line. That means we're going to have to put a number, a cost in line 15. Okay, and our hypothetical employee here didn't obtain coverage. They didn't enroll in coverage with the employer, so we end up with a blank line on line 16. And that employee goes to an exchange, gets coverage, and they're eligible for a subsidy. It seems to us that when they turn this 1095-C in, or when they show this 1095-C to the exchange, or they report the information on their tax return, it could trigger problems. They're going to look like someone who didn't take an offer. They're going to look like a full-time employee who didn't take an offer of coverage because it was unaffordable.
Right, and could trigger a B penalty for you as the employer.
Now let's remember that this is a part-time employee who didn't accept an offer of coverage. In fact, you employer had no obligation to issue them a 1095-C, but because you thought they were a full-time employee, you thought better safe than sorry, I'll issue the 1095-C and look at what you've created.
Right. Right. An interesting conversation with Treasury or the IRS to say, no, in fact, I reported them incorrectly.
Exactly. So that's the end of the story for today. We will continue to post some screencasts that sort of touch this issue from different perspectives. But I think what we are starting to understand is even for those employers who are safely passing the 70% test this year, now is the time to start gearing up and figuring out where your full-time employees really are.
Agreed.